Here's what we've got at stake in Texas. We're either going to understand what protects freedom and what destroys it, or we're going to be an enslaved people. I've been talking about for the last week, we think we own our property, but we're really all just tenants in our homes. You got to ask permission to put a carport next to your house. You got to ask permission to build a fence around the backyard. You got to ask permission to drill a well on your land, and if you pump too much water, you get in trouble for that. Whose land is it? Our founders understood that private property ownership was an essential element of freedom, and we don't own a thing. And everything that the government does reinforces to you by their action that they believe that's their land. They can take it if they want to pave a multi-lane highway through this state. It's their land. They can confiscate it through eminent domain and do whatever they want because it's their land. It's time we stood up in Texas and said, hell no, it's not. It's our land. We better understand that, y'all. We better understand that property ownership is as essential to freedom as air and water is to life. Don't compromise on getting rid of those property taxes. Do not compromise on harnessing the abuse of eminent domain. You chain eminent domain to the Constitution, you get rid of property tax, you'll own your land again, and there will be prosperity like you haven't dreamed of in 50 years in Texas. We've been talking about private property ownership and gun ownership since the beginning of this campaign, and we've been talking about state sovereignty. And just this past week, a man who's well respected in the state of Texas, a man named David Barton, he was longtime vice chair of the Texas Republican Party, has published a thesis just about to tell you why I'm crazy and why nullification won't work for Texas and we can't be sovereign. I think David Barton may have an argument he ought to take up with Thomas Jefferson, but I'm taking my marching orders from Thomas Jefferson and Madison. They wrote the document. You're going to have all kinds of legal scholars and consultants that are going to tell you you can't be a sovereign state. What they're saying to you is you can't be a free people. We can't tolerate that anymore. We will be free when we restore private property ownership and when we put Washington back to Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Mr. Jefferson said it is the unquestionable right of the state to determine. It's not the Supreme Court's determination. They're part of the federal government. It's all rights not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people decide when the federal government steps outside of the Constitution. The states decide. We haven't been doing our job. I've been saying for a little over a week now, maybe we would have understood Mr. Jefferson a little bit better if he said it's our duty. It's our duty as a state. We want to pass on to future generations a free and prosperous United States of America and a sovereign Texas. We're going to have to exercise our duty. You let the kids run willy-nilly through the house and break things, they're going to run willy-nilly through the house and break things. You let Washington grow and she's going to grow. That's what government does. The founders knew it, the colonists knew it, and they said it's the unquestionable right of the states to check the federal government. Since the last time I spoke at a big event in San Antonio, I met with a Texas congressman, a man who before he went to Washington, D.C. to serve Texas, served us as a district judge in this state. He sat on the bench, he's interpreted the law. And I said to him, sir, I'd like to talk with you about nullification. I believe it's the rightful remedy. I want to know what the Congress Congress is going to do. I want to know what the federal government is going to do to Texas when we start exercising our sovereignty and start pushing you out. I'm quite confident there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth in Washington, D.C. And we talked about that, and I had been with all of you all across the state saying, where do we start? Because we know the federal government is intruding into education and they shouldn't be there, and they're in ag and energy, and they shouldn't be there. Where do we start? And that congressman said to me, you might set your sights on the EPA. I know the governor doesn't want you to think we exist, but did you notice they're going to sue the EPA? We've been talking about it since last November, and this week the governor finally gets on the ball and says, yeah, maybe the state of Texas needs to sue the EPA. He's had 9 years. He's a slow learner. He's not fighting for Texas. He's not fighting for Texas. We need to thank him for his service, and we need to send him home and let him live under the laws of the people. You begin to push the federal government out of Texas. Push it out. Cut it out. It's not going to go willingly. And it's not going to be painless. But either we will restore our sovereignty at the ballot box and at the soapbox, or our kids will be forced to use the ammo box one day to regain the freedoms that we have let slip away. We're this close, Texas. We're this close. This race ought to show you again that when people are committed to the ideas of freedom, you will attract others to your cause. Your neighbors will come with you. I had a lady here this evening that said she's a lifelong Democrat. She's voting in the Republican primary. She said, I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't win. People have been writing on our Facebook for months, it's not about right and left, it's about right and wrong. We've got to have government, we've got to have leaders that understand service and excellence. We haven't had excellence in state government in years. The government grows and grows and grows, and we become more and more oppressed. We can fix what ails Texas by getting back to the U.S. Constitution and to a sovereign state. You get rid of property tax, you restore gun ownership as a means for the people to protect themselves, you restore state sovereignty, you secure her border. There will be a much brighter future for Texas, but not just for Texas. We've been saying for some months now that this race is changing the political landscape in Texas, but I want to tell you that the country and indeed the world is watching this race. Europe and Asia are struggling in the same way that America is. We are making the same mistakes that they made 20 years ago. They have socialized the continent. We are heading in that same direction. And there are patriots in Europe and Asia looking to us. You were once the beacon of hope for the world, what's happening in America, and then they see that race in Texas. And they say there's a glimmer of hope. If Texas will just put Debra Medina in as governor and stand with her, there's a glimmer of hope. I got an email this week. It's up on our website. I don't know if I can share the closing without crying. There's a man running for Congress out of Oklahoma. He's sending his team, his campaign team, to North Texas to work the polls this coming weekend because they believe how important this race is.